You're listening to the Struck Podcast. I'm Dan Blewett.
I'm Alan Hall.
And here on Struck, we talk about everything aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. On today's show, we're going to run through some interesting, controversial headlines about COVID and masks. We'll talk about drones potentially getting as big as 747s, an amazing new motor from BMW, and we'll hit news about Whisk, Eve, flying car safety debates, aviation news, and more. So, Alan, let's jump into it first here. This airline in Portugal called TAP, their CEO has said that they believe masks will be worn maybe forever. Here's the quote from their CEO. We have to put into place so many additional protocols. I am absolutely convinced they will stay forever. Now, this might be referring to other like cleaning protocols, stuff like that, which would be reasonable. Like I think a lot of people say, hey, some of this cleaning stuff we've done is pretty great because obviously the flu and other, seasonal diseases have gone way down. So maybe there's something to this. That makes sense. But it seems like she's implying that the masks might stay on airplanes, which what's your take on that, Alan?
I don't think there's any way that's going to happen in the United States. There's going to be a revolt. There already is a revolt going on right now. And when we have 70% of the flight crew customer interactions, violent interactions being related to masks, then you're just asking for more of that. And if you throw out this edict, in my opinion, if you throw out this edict of the masks are going to last forever, you're going to have a change of where people use transportation, that they'll stop flying for things that they can stop flying and take other modes of transportation. Obviously, crossing the oceans is a little hard, but internally, like in the United States, we're internal to Portugal, I assume you can take trains or drive, and that may be the alternative. It becomes less convenient, right? Isn't airlines just a convenience thing for a lot of people?
Get there quick.
Right, you can get there quicker, right? It saves time, right? But if it's such a pain in the backside, then you weigh that off and say, well, I don't know if I really want to do that. And it doesn't also imply, I think the opposite is true. It doesn't imply that the airplanes are dirty. That's the way I looked at it. Like, well, it's just saying the airplanes are dirty and I have to protect myself from the airplanes itself because the airplane's an unsafe space. I don't know if any airline CEO ought to be even remotely implying that, because I think that's what it implies. Like, I don't need it when I'm at the grocery store, but I need it on this airplane. That's a confluence of bad press to me that I don't know if any U.S. airline CEO would even get near. Do you think so?
No, and airlines are proven to be very well ventilated, right? We've known that since the beginning, that they turn their air over. Like every air molecule in the cabin is replaced every 3 minutes. So it's quite the opposite.
Boeing and Airbus have said the same thing. They've all done the studies. It isn't like we haven't looked at it. And if we're saying that science is now interpretive, I don't know where we go from here. It doesn't make any sense to me right now. And I hopefully that the customers, particularly the ones that are the business travelers on these airlines, start pushing back, because those are the ones that can really hurt an airline the fastest. If those $10,000 tickets can hurt you if they don't show up.
I just can't imagine that the CEO of TAP would really believe that airplane mask mandates could be a forever thing. And maybe was taken out of context. Maybe she's referring more to just some of the cleaning protocols, which, like I said, probably do make sense to keep long term.
I'm all for.
Yeah, a cleaner airplane is always better than a slightly less clean airplane, like sure. But yeah, there's no way mask mandates are going to be a long-term thing when life gets back to normal-ish.
Right, and we've all been on airplanes and thought to ourselves, man, this airplane is dirty. I'm not sure I'm sitting there. Let me change seats, because they don't necessarily get cleaned all that much. And if we see food and debris and trash everywhere, then in the back of your head, in these sort of post-COVID days, I'll call them, you're thinking, well, what other diseases are floating around from that seat? If that's trashy visually, it's also going to be trashy in things I can't see, bacteria, viruses, whatever. That worries, I think it's going to worry a lot of passengers. And I do think, having traveled a decent amount on these airplanes where they have been cleaning them, the airplanes are so much nicer because nothing's sticky. You're not sitting in anything sticky. You don't have coffee poured on the floor. It just things are cleaner, and it just feels like a more pleasant experience. And hopefully, the airlines will continue that to some level.
Well, moving on, and this is another thing that's very interesting if this could come to fruition. This company Nautilus, and they've wind tunnel tested a couple scale models, and they're hoping to have a full scale prototype in 2023. But their goal is to have Boeing 747 size cargo aircraft with a blended wing design that will be drones. They'll be autonomous to transport cargo. Um, Alan, this seems like such a big stretch because A, it's such a big aircraft, and B, it's also a really unique design. I mean, how many blended wing aircraft of any type? Obviously, they'd all have to be manned by a pilot. Are there any blended wing designs besides like was it the B-2 stealth bomber, like in design today?
Oh yeah, military. Yeah, all the military ones are all blended wing sort of things, and nothing commercial at the moment. I think that was all based out of a Lockheed design way back in the 50s. Those sort of B-50, B-2-ish designs, and NASA has played around with the sort of the wing body mergence designs, and I think Boeing talked about that also internally for a while. That maybe their next generation will look like that. The I don't the drone issue in the United States is in a weird spot right now because we all feel like drones will be the future, that we need to have drones doing cargo moves or bringing us our KFC or Taco Bell, whatever we're going to have drones do for us.
That's imperative. Yeah, that's imperative. Yeah. Chick-fil-A, they have great customer service. They will for sure be sending drones to your house. Yeah.
And the Chick-fil-A mafia will just keep cranking in that money because it just is delivering a service. And I think the risks are low, right? The risk reward of that, the risk side is that the drone falls and it lands in the street and somebody runs over your Chick-fil-A sandwich, and the reward is Chick-fil-A sells more sandwiches. That's the equation.
Not too big a deal.
Yeah, right. And if you have a 747 full of Chick-fil-A's and it falls out of the sky, that's a bigger deal to me. And I wonder if that if the FAA can even really accommodate that.
Yeah, and it seems like a huge national security risk to have really big drones that could be potentially hacked. Like this has been the year of realizing that even the best companies in the world get hacked, which is terrifying. Even companies that make cybersecurity software, like SolarWinds, get hacked. So the idea that these could be just, oh, they're good up there in the sky, cruising, over the Atlantic, bringing cargo over, and just never be. That's terrifying. They would become a missile. You think back to 9/11. It's scary. Yeah, it's one pilot. How much does that cost? Not that much money in relative terms. Yeah,
it won't be one pilot. Those size aircraft are going to be a crew of a minimum 2 or maybe 4 as they switch off. But yeah, what's the problem with if the aircraft's so efficient, then the cost of pilots kind of gets washed out of it. And something that size, the pilots can get removed in a sense cost wise, and it doesn't matter anymore. And sort of in that same framework, they're talking about getting funding at like a $900 million level to build this prototype and to get things up and running. It's just rounded up to $1 billion. So they're going to have $1 billion to build this thing. I'm not sure you can do that for $1 billion. When Joby's talking about building a little electric aircraft for $1 billion. So 747 in today's world, I feel like it's probably 5 times that amount because it's the buildings and the people and the stuff. It's probably a $5 billion exercise. That's really hard to do in this environment where everybody's reaching out for high growth opportunities and inflation's so high. Airplanes don't tend to be a place where companies want to invest in and people want to invest in right now.
Yeah, and this company Nautilus, they were founded in 2016, and they announced $6 billion in pre-orders for 440 aircraft. And so, but we've seen that with lots of the eVTOL companies that people just, hey, yeah, we're interested in this idea, but again, this company's doesn't have a full-size prototype yet, so they're very far away from, like you said, getting it into production. And like you said, the challenges for being a full-size large aircraft are significant. So yeah, we'll see, but it's definitely an interesting concept. Obviously, the idea of moving freight across an ocean or wherever, And I'm not sure that that's their main goal, but they do talk about how, you know, freight by sea is 13 times cheaper, but takes 50 times longer. So obviously doing this by plane, like the use case certainly makes sense. But like you've said on so many episodes, just the execution and the financial component is really, really significant.
Where it all happens, right?
Well, moving on into other tech trends, and this is interesting. BMW, and of course, like Tesla's been obviously the innovator in the electric vehicle space, but BMW has just churned out a really impressive motor that a lot of people are talking about, and it has no magnets. So, Alan, why is this significant, and where might this technology trickle down, or could it trickle up into aviation?
Yeah, I guess it's trickling up from locomotives into the automobile world, and then from automobiles, you got to wonder if it's going to trickle into the aviation world too. So they're moving away from a permanent magnet motor. So if you think of the outside of a motor is where all the coils of wires are on the outside, and you got that rotating part on the inside called the rotor. The rotors on a permanent magnet motor are permanent magnets. So there's permanent magnets on the spinning part. And so what you do is you create an electric field that spins around on the outside on the stator, and the permanent magnets sort of follow that field around. So it's kind of a dog leading the pony kind of thing. So that's the basic motor. And there's a lot of reasons why you want to do it that way. It tends to be less expensive, or has been less expensive. It's you can use regenerative techniques. So like in Tesla, I think they use them for braking to generate some electricity back, and it's not a small amount. It's several percentage points. It can get generated back into the battery system. But the problem right now, in which everybody is becoming extremely aware about, is China holds most of those magnetic materials. And they're concerned that that's going to get cut off, or China's going to have internal disputes, which is going to cut off access to Germany, the United States, pick any country that uses those magnets. What are you going to do? If you can't get the magnets, you need to have a plan B. And the plan B is to revert back to sort of the original motors, which have brushes and commutators. So the outside of the motors is coils of wire. The rotor is also coils of wire, and there's a connection between the two. Essentially, the problem with it is you have brushes. So anybody who's played around with motors as a kid or messed around with some brush motors is that there's brushes, and those brushes wear. They're making contact as the motor spins. Those brushes are constantly making contact. There's arcing going on in there and all kinds of carbon dust and things, and they get dirty over time. And those motors wear out. You have to maintain them. It'd be more like an internal combustion engine. You like changing the oil. So you have to clean up those brushes, replace the brushes, put a new set in, get rid of all the carbon stuff that's floating around, and just keep maintenance up on them. So it's a more maintenance intense system. But Dan, if you can't get magnets, you got to have plan B. And what everybody's moving to old school with some new technology thrown on top of it. Does that make sense to how that works?
It does. And, there's still a lot to shake out in the EV space and in the space all over with electric motors. Like, there's just not a clear, there's today's best way to do it, but is today's best way going to be the same way 3 years or 5 years from now? Probably not. So it's all these different iterations seem like a good thing for the industry. Yeah. And like you said, if they don't need magnets and there's suddenly a crisis of getting them in a couple years, which who knows what could happen. Obviously, we experienced that with the pandemic. They're in a good place to weather that storm, where they could be the only, kind of like in Forrest Gump when he's the only shrimp boat out to sea when that storm hits, and then suddenly Bubba Gump shrimp is the shrimp everyone's gonna get. So could be something like that. So it seems like a good hedge for them to keep pushing the envelope and developing alternative technology. So let's move on. Jump into our eVTOL space for today. So the U.S. Attorney General has decided not to bring charges against the Archer employee who was the focus of Whisk's civil lawsuit against them. So, Alan, obviously we've covered this in pieces over time, over the last year. Why did they come to this decision?
Well, they felt like they didn't have a federal case. That doesn't mean the civil case won't continue on. It will, I think. The feds will get involved if there's movement of sensitive material or corporate material across state lines, that becomes a federal offense, and then the feds will come in and start investigating it. Whether they decide to prosecute or not, there's so many factors in that. It doesn't actually say why they gave up on pursuing a case at the federal level. You don't. Who knows, right? It could be for hundreds of reasons. But I don't think that Whisk is going to with Whisk/Boeing is going to give up on this pathway. And we were having discussions internally in WeatherGuard here about this particular issue. And the consensus was, I don't have to take documents out to transfer knowledge to the next company. That would be rare. I mean, why? If you're smart, you should never do that anyway, because you end up being brought in front of the Department of Justice. But most of the things lie in your head, and the way you think through problems gets defined by the way you solve the previous problem. So you're going to take that same solution to the next company you're going to work for. You see that a lot in aviation, where engineers move from one place and they bring their ideas over. I think Whisk still has some cause here to be of concern, because the Archer design looks a lot like the Whisk design, and the people from Whisk moving over to Archer doesn't feel right, and probably shouldn't feel right. But Dan, think of it this way. We have the right to work in the United States. I can leave a company A and go to work for company B. Now, there's labor laws and contracts you can sign that would prevent you from doing that. But a lot of those are getting tossed out lately. And I think in some states they're not even allowed, because it's taken away your ability to earn an income. Right? Particularly if you're laid off. I think that one's completely unfair. If company A lays you off and says you can't work anywhere in the industry, that's not right. Come on. You just decided to get rid of me. That doesn't make any sense. But if you walk away from company A and go to company B for a raise, promotion, better working conditions, air conditioning, whatever that may be, then I kind of feel like, yeah, I have to, as an engineer, not bring that technology with me. I may have a way to solve problems in my head, but Dan, I just can't say, well, the way that we did it at Whisk is blah, blah, blah. That's not really how it should go down. And we're talking about billion-dollar companies now. They can hire a lot of lawyers. And as an engineer, I don't think you want to be in the middle of that, but it's too late, right? We're way beyond negotiating now. I think this is going to get settled in a courtroom.
Like you said before, it's hard to say, if you're bringing actual documents. Like I was watching I have two Netflix references that are relevant. I was watching one about espionage with Benedict Cumberbatch. This was about, based on true events that, they're stealing, spying on the Soviets for a long time, getting secrets back. That's one thing where you're taking evidence of documents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this other movie that maybe you've seen, which I enjoyed, is called The Book of Eli. And it's a post-apocalyptic world where there's no books left. And Denzel Washington's character has a King James Bible, and he's walking across trying to find the place where it belongs, so that, this book can be, have the power that it had to do good. And you don't realize till the end that he's blind. The book's written in Braille. So I apologize for spoiling it. Dang it, shouldn't have done that.
Oh, dang it. I haven't seen that one. And I love Denzel Washington too. Come on.
Spoiler alert. Anyway, but he gets there, but he loses possession of the book along the way. And finally he gets to his destination, and he says, I have in my possession the King James Bible. And he proceeds to sit down and read the Bible, and someone transcribes it. So that's where the IP. I'm sorry if I've spoiled this. I've spoiled this movie for you because.
Oh, you totally have, actually.
Yes, I have. Still worth watching, but that kind of like sounds like the same kind of IP thing. Like he said he had a King James Bible. He didn't, not physically, but he had memorized it over 30 years of reading it. So can you hold him to account for stealing that work? I think on one hand you kind of could, because it's like he transcribed the book word for word, but it was also in his head. So what did he steal? It's a really complex problem. I'm not saying that's exactly what happened here, but it's just a general, example of how intellectual property could get passed. Like if you can memorize a lot of it, redraw it, this is what they did. That, it's a complicated system.
And also, the supply chain. I think that's probably one of the bigger pieces of information. Where do they get X? Where do they get Y? and who are the contact points at these companies where you can buy this same thing from, right? And that can tell you a lot about an airplane. If you know who the suppliers are, you can really delve down pretty quickly. That's how investors do it. Same way. They look at where they're buying parts from, right? And that'll tell you a lot about who's working what and how much it costs to make it. That's part of the knowledge base. And walking away with that, you got to be really careful doing that, because they did pay you to work at their company, and they feel like you've walked off with things that you don't own. Understandable. It's understandable.
It's a complicated process, so we'll see how that continues to play out in in civil court. So moving on, Eve has announced some of their plans for type certification for their eVTOL, and just sort of reaffirm their commitment to getting into compliance sooner than later. So, Alan, what does this mean? I mean, they're just sort of like laying out what their process is going to be, or what are they actually explaining here?
It lays out the rules, the airplane design rules, or what the airplane has to meet. That's huge in any aircraft design effort, is knowing what the aircraft needs to meet in terms of performance, and having those identified early in the process instead of being more like a guessing game, and it's developed as you're going along, is a big risk reduction effort. So, and Embraer has been, I think, historically really good at getting the framework in place before spending a lot of money. And this is another example of that. On the Eve, they're getting the framework in place, what the aircraft has to do, so they can design it to meet that criteria without spending extra money guessing at it. Because the worst thing, and I have seen this, the worst thing that can happen is the certification authority realizes that there's a particular way your airplane performs that is maybe different, unique, and they start writing rules about it, about how it's going to perform. And you're like, well, geez, we've already spent $100 million getting to this point. We're going to have to change it? And the answer is typically, yeah, you do have to change it. Those things can bite you really hard. And the FAA, I got to give credit to the FAA also. More recently, the FAA has been very proactive about that and getting those rules defined. In the eVTOL market in particular, I think what I'm seeing come out from the FAA is really good stuff that allows the designers to design to a minimum standard and to not be too prescriptive. So it allows a lot of new ideas to come about. And Embraer is doing the same thing with the certification authority in Brazil. That's fantastic. Good on everybody there.
So do you think Eve is still on track to meet some of their goals? Obviously, every company is trying to get their vehicle out the door as fast as possible, but obviously Eve has been backed. They were a spinoff of Embraer, or I guess they're still in the process of going public as a separate entity. I'm not sure if they're actually public yet as their own entity, but yeah. But obviously they have a lot of, they come from that well-defined, aircraft manufacturer. So this is going to, I assume, keep them on track. And do you think they're still going to meet their goal of being, I don't know is it 2023 for Eve is their goal, or maybe 2024? I don't have it in front of me.
I thought it was 24 to get something up in the air. I mean, certification-wise, it's going to be more like 2026, I would guess right now. Not saying we're in 2022 right now. It's going to be a 4-year kind of effort. But they're doing the process in the right order. They're not building an airplane, then realizing we got to go certify it, and then starting over again. And those things just eat up cash and time and engineers, and it doesn't benefit the bottom line. And the airplane business, I keep saying the same thing here, but the airplane business is a business, and we can't spend money on things that don't return that investment. And this is why, if you look at Joby this week, they're talking about starting certification tests. And so they put out this big flyer, and I think everybody in their first head is going, oh, Joby's flying certification test. No, not at all. What they're doing is they're pulling apart composite samples to show the composite structure is as strong as they say that it is. That's a certification test. It is. It's a valid certification test. And it tells you sort of start small and work you up to the big things. So that the fact that that Embraer and Joby and Archer, for that matter, and Whisk for a number of these companies are going down the proper pathway shows you that the management of those companies understands what the process is. It isn't like they haven't been around the airplane business, or they brought people in that understand what those steps are. That's how you save money long term, is to get the right people in the right slots who can accelerate the program without having to repeat it. Key, super key.
Well, speaking of people, and this was an interesting story because we covered Aviation last week. The CEO of Aviation, Omer Bar Yohei, is leaving the company rather abruptly, and this is just before their first flight was scheduled to take place. I guess either in the coming weeks. But Alan, this seems like a pretty abrupt shakeup of the company and their leadership.
It's hard to read on this one. Just full disclosure, I'm helping them a little bit on some lightning protection stuff, really early stuff. And I don't know much about the internal workings of the company. In fact, I know nothing about the internal workings of the company. But in all of these companies, it does just not make it specific to aviation here. In all these companies, you have outside investors, and you have a set of milestones that they're trying to meet to keep the investment money coming. It feels like the lack of first flight before the end of the year was a milestone that the investors didn't like, and we're in February, sort of headed towards March right now. The sooner they can get in the air, the more comfortable investors feel because I now have a flying aircraft, a flying prototype. So whatever's holding that back, it makes investors nervous because they feel like they're not going to have a return on investment. And with the economic conditions the way that they are, investments are getting a little bit tighter. Everybody's being a little more cautious with their money. It's not a great time for aircraft development because of that. And it's just because of this inflationary period that we're in right now. It forces all investors to relook at their portfolio and say, okay, what's my long-term play? What's my short-term play? And do I have any of my investments that are underperforming or not meeting their milestones? Well, not meeting first flight, it fits into that not meeting the milestone thing. Who knows what's going on internally? I'm sure the engineering staff, from what I know, is extremely competent and is doing the right things. So it feels like an investor top-level management disagreement about the speed of the program. And I've seen this in pretty much every aircraft program I've ever worked on. has that same sort of conflict at the top going on, and it's not it's not tiddlywinks, right? Aviation is a full contact sport, and sometimes people get lost in that. It's unfortunate because I think a lot of the people that had driven aviation to where it is today are really smart, right? To do that, to get to this point is brilliant. It just, the timing sometimes doesn't work out, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems like that's one of the hazards of having to get investment money. And for a lot of these companies that you've been talking about, the more, if you need that $1 billion or a couple $1 billion to get that aircraft to market, you're going to have a lot of people helping you get there financially, and they're going to have a say. And you hear that from different podcasts, like, you and I both love Guy Raz's podcast, How I Built This. And you just hear all the different stories of how, the investors have, great effect, and they can be great partners, or they can be really difficult partners. It just depends. Every company's different, where, they lose some autonomy because, again, they've got now lots of other people to keep happy, and they have to be good stewards of the money that they were given. So yeah, it's definitely a big challenge, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's not easy. And like I said, I don't think it has a reflection on the people. It has more to do with just the timing of where the economy is and where the programs are. And it's just a really tough place to be.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Struck Aerospace Engineering Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Please leave us a review, subscribe wherever you listen on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher. We will see you here next week on Struck. Strike Tape, WeatherGuard Lightning Tech's proprietary lightning protection for radomes, provides unmatched durability for years to come. If you need help with your radome lightning protection, reach out to us at weatherguardaero.com. That's weatherguardaero.com.